So on behalf of the NISTS staff, many of whom that you will see on tiles across this broadcast, as well as our NISTS advisory board, let me be the first person to say, glad to meet ya, and to welcome you to our virtual conference. We are grateful to even be having this gathering in this format, and we feel it's going to be an excellent opportunity for us to learn from one another, connect with one another, and retain many of the things that we find so special about in-person convenings. We couldn't do this without you, and there are over 900 of you joining us today. Thank you ever so much for being a part of this all. But I'll tell you what, virtual environments can be tricky. And we expect that throughout your time today, you may have some technical challenges. We might have some technical challenges, but I know that we'll all be really flexible with that. The first two things I want to tell you about, for those of you who want to see the live transcription, it should be playing for you right now on your screen. And if by chance you need to toggle that off and on, you just hit the closed captions button. So you should have no trouble doing that during our time together today. Second of all, during Dr. Bensimon's presentation and following that, we will have an opportunity for some question and answers. We'll get to as many of those questions as possible, but you can be submitting those through the Q&A button down at the bottom of your screen as well. So when we think about virtual environments, you know, we should be in Portland right now. We're sad that we're not, but being here has afforded all of us some actual amenities, if you will. I don't know if all of you are practicing the professional on the bottom and relaxed, or on the top and relaxed on the bottom perspective. But for me this morning, instead of being in my hotel room and thinking about what I was going to share with you this morning, I actually had the opportunity to cook breakfast for my children. My two middle school boys have a soccer game this afternoon, later this evening, and guess what? I get to attend. So it's not all bad in being virtual. And I can only expect that you're going to be pulled in multiple directions these next few days as well. So I hope that what we can provide to you is an opportunity not only to dive into transfer today, tomorrow, and Thursday, but also to come back to the materials. Most of what you're going to be seeing this next few days is going to be recorded. You'll have a chance to get into the archives, to get into the replay back now through the end of April. We also have quite a few on-demand sessions already waiting in our library for you. So just know that we're going to be spending lots of time in person, in this new in-person, but also we'll be able to continue to learn together over time as you go back through the conference archives. So as we think back to last year, and what a year it's been, no joke. I think the thing that was most perplexing for me over the course of this last year is just about every time that I figured out, or thought I figured out what was going on, things would shift, right? So it really made it difficult because there was this constant churning. And in listening to all of you over the course of the last few months, I think that it's been a very similar situation for most all of us as well. You know, finding our place, finding our passion over the course of working remotely, being challenged by so many different things has really caused us to have to dig a little deeper. And I'm incredibly encouraged by the fact that you all have chosen this convening to be a part of when we know you have so many things pulling you in multiple directions. What that tells me is that your curiosity is intact, as is your commitment to serve. And I'm incredibly humbled by that. So if you have felt a little discombobulated over the course of the last year, we can only imagine how that's playing out for our students as well. Those students who are expecting a transfer that didn't happen, those who are making an unplanned transfer, those who are continuing their path but in a different learning environment, so many different things that our transfer students are going through right now. And then there are those students that unfortunately transfer isn't an option right now. Their educational journeys have been interrupted by life circumstances. We're going to be talking about those students today and all things transfer over the course of the next 3 days. And I know I'm not telling you anything you haven't already thought about, felt deeply in your core. It's been a rough couple of months, several months, lots of months, almost an entire year. But I hope that we can spend time the next 3 days kind of retooling, finding that passion, really getting into what we call transfer advocacy. So when we at NISTS talk about transfer champions, we really break them down into three kind of areas, and each one has kind of a distinct way of functioning, if you will. We think of transfer agents, we think of transfer connectors, and we think of transfer advocates. And this week we're celebrating transfer agents. Those are those individuals who absolutely spend their time one-on-one, really getting into thinking about what those transfer students need. And we know for a fact, without transfer agents, without all of you, our students would not be successful. So you may have noticed that our theme for this week is not so secret transfer agents, because you know what? Not everybody on this video or in this call or in this room is really good at tooting your own horn. Many of you do your work in silence, not because you're being quiet, but because you value work. It's the work you're committed to. It's the work that you do every day. It's not something that you particularly think of as special, but we're here to celebrate you, because without you, our transfers would not be successful. So I'm really excited to start off this conference with a presentation by an individual who's a stalwart in our community. And when we came up with the idea of not so secret transfer agents, we knew immediately who we wanted to invite to be our keynote speaker. Because Dr. ESTELA Bensimon is a trailblazer, has spent many years studying transfer, co-coined the term transfer agent. So we're going to hear from the beginning how this came to be. And what I really, really respect and admire so much about Dr. Bensimon is that she's been pushing boundaries for years. As the founder for the Center of Urban Education at the University of Southern California, she has been using this term equity for decades. Back when it wasn't vogue, back when we all thought diversity was enough of a topic to cover. She kept saying, no, it's equity. And more important, it's racial equity. She's been challenging us for years. And maybe, just maybe, her audience is broadening. And maybe ears are opening up in new ways. So when we think of Dr. ESTELA Bensimon, we know that we have an educational trailblazer amongst us. And I would, at this point in time, like to invite Dr. ESTELA Mara Bensimon to the stage to share words with us. Welcome, Dr. Bensimon.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that lovely introduction. And yes, and I'm coming to you from Los Angeles, my living room. This organization is particularly special to me because one of my PhD students was given the award several years ago, Dr. Casey Memji. So again, thank you for inviting me. I thought I would tell you a little bit about how I came to work in the area of transfer. When I finished my doctoral degree at Teachers College, the Ford Foundation was beginning the Transfer Opportunities Program. Most of you probably never heard of it, but it was a really big initiative in around 1983 to all the late 80s. And that initiative essentially was to bring more of a focus on transfer, particularly from urban colleges, urban community colleges to four-year colleges. And the Ford Foundation needed a project director. And I became that project director. So that's how, that was my entry into transfer. And then I ended up doing a postdoc with Florence Brower and Art Cohen, both who have recently passed on. So I have a long, long history around work with community colleges. Let me share my screen now with you, and let us hope that this all works well. There we are. So we're going to talk about today fulfilling the racial equity imperative. And as was mentioned by Dr. Marling, I will be speaking. At first, I'm going to talk about the notion of transfer agents or institutional agents. And depending on our time, I will share with you how you can use the methods of inquiry to develop transfer agents. So now, one of the things that Dr. Marling mentioned, which is true, is that more people are speaking about equity than they did 20 years ago when I started this work. So one of the things that happens when language becomes part of the everyday discourse, sometimes the meanings can get lost. And I see that in part happening with the way in which people use the term equity, often without necessarily qualifying it as racial equity, or really thinking about equity from a critical perspective. So this is the way that I define racial equity. One of the definitions is that it's corrective justice. It's corrective justice because here in the United States, we do owe a debt to individuals who were enslaved, colonized, victims of genocide, and who were excluded from our higher education system, even as they were the builders of it. So that's what equity is to me, corrective justice. The second definition for me of racial equity is that it has to be an anti-racist project. So if we draw from the recent work, the book by Ibrahim Kendi on how to be an anti-racist, we need to begin to think about, for instance, our transfer policies. Do they produce racist or anti-racist outcomes? Our practices around transfer centers, our practices around honors programs that guarantee transfer to highly selective institutions. And I had a chance to look to see who is in the audience. And I have to give a shout out to Alfred Herrera, who is out there, UCLA, and he is the international transfer champion. The third definition is decentering whiteness. So oftentimes, without us realizing it, our policies, our practices, the ways in which we think, white is the referential point. And I hope that as I talk about institutional agents, this will become more clear. So the point here that I want to make is that transfer centers, articulation agreement, student success centers, college fairs, counselors, transfer academies, associate degree in transfer. By the way, the associate degree in transfer is a policy here in California, which guarantees students from community colleges to transfer as juniors into the Cal State University system when there are curricular agreements among disciplinary departments. And it has been a very successful policy. But these things alone, even though they are very, very important, they cannot by themselves eliminate low transfer rates. And I'm not going to cite all of the statistics, but we know that that there are low rates of transfer. And when I mentioned that equity is corrective justice, it's also corrective transfer is a form of corrective justice, because many of if you think about California and the master plan, it was Clark Kerr, who was the president of the University of California, who came up with the idea that one of the ways of protecting the selectivity, the elitism of the University of California was by building a strong community college system and providing an alternative route into higher education. So in many ways, there was an injustice around that, and transfer is in part addressing that. So what I'm going to start speaking about is institutional agents, or, they can also, in our case, they can be thought of as transfer agents. So the way that this term, institutional agents, comes from the sociologist Ricardo Stanton Salazar, who developed the concept in reference to K through 12 students and important individuals in their lives that influence their college aspirations and college-going behaviors. Sometime in the mid-2000s, Alicia Dowd, myself, and many others in a research team, we had a grant from the Jack and Cook Foundation to look at transfer from community colleges into highly selective universities and colleges. And as part of that project, we conducted interviews with, and actually life histories with students. And it was through, so that was one project, and that's when we began to emerge the concept of institutional agents around transfer. We also conducted a National Science Foundation project around community college, Latinx community colleges in STEM who were transferring to four-year colleges. And through those interviews, we came with a more fine-grained understanding of institutional agents. And we have written many different articles around this. So it was through these two projects, the Jack and Cook and the National Science Foundation, that we actually expanded the concept of institutional agent into all of these different types. And in your chat, I hope that they were able to include one of the documents that actually shows all of these institutional agents and their definitions. And Ricardo Stanton Salazar was involved with us in the project with the National Science Foundation and was critical in developing these these profiles of different kinds of agents. So who can be institutional agents? They can be faculty, they can be deans, they can be directors of program, provosts, and an evidence team members refers to what the Center for Urban Education calls inquiry teams that we organize in order to inquire into different institutional practices. Now, sometimes concepts like the ones I just showed you, that picture of institutional agents and with all of those complicated variations, and sometimes it's easier to understand these concepts through a story. And this is actually what makes it nice. It's a real story. So I'm going to illustrate the meaning of transfer agents through the story of ADRIÁN Trinidad. And as I tell the story, ADRIÁN's experiences will become clear and why transfer agents or institutional agents were important. So ADRIÁN, as a very young boy, lived near the USC campus. And his family would often on Sundays, take a walk around the campus. And it was during one of those walks that ADRIÁN picked up from the ground a bookmark that said USC, and he kept it. I think he still in fact, he still has it. And decided that that was his dream to come and to USC, which is where I just retired from. And but he didn't start out his education at USC. He actually went to the Los Angeles Trade Tech College. And this is a college that is very close to USC in terms of distance, but very far from USC culturally. And And in fact, very few students ever transfer from Los Angeles Trade Tech College because, as the name implies, its emphasis has always been more on occupational careers. So the person that I'm showing here, which is, Adrian's name is real, by the way, and I asked him if I could do this. Manuel Diaz is an anonymous name for his English teacher at LA Trade Tech College. So in talking with Adrián, this teacher, this English instructor, what he said about him was he introduced me to literature that I had never, known, Toni Morrison, Rigoberta Menchú, and many others. And it was this individual who actually encouraged Adrián and helped him to think about transfer. And so he provided Adrián with knowledge, intellectual knowledge of literature that touched Adrián, but also with information about success and about transferring and earning a baccalaureate. This professor was also from Central America and shared with his students the difficulties around adjusting, around speaking English with an accent and so forth. So he spoke to the students and to Adrián's life. So Adrián transferred to USC. And this was amazing because I can probably count in one hand how many students from LA Trade Tech transferred to USC. And here, when he came to USC, he transferred more or less as a junior into sociology. And one of the individuals that he met was someone I have called Jorge Santillana, a very well-known professor of history at USC, also from East Los Angeles, Boyle Heights area, also himself a first-generation college student. And he had programs to assist students like Adrián. One of those programs was to introduce students like Adrián to other cultures, other worlds, and Adrián got to travel with Jorge Santillana to Japan on a study group. And there were many other ways in which this professor assisted or worked with, supported Adrián. And so then came another professor at USC, Mauricio, Mauricio Gutierrez. And this is a sociology professor, also very, very well known. And Adrián took a class with him. And it was in his class that Adrián shared with this professor his journey from LA Trade Tech to USC. And to this day, Adrián remembers this professor buying him a very expensive ticket to a gala event at LA Trade Tech. He also told the students, the Latino students in particular, who are now beginning to think about graduate education, to pursue, their passions, and was very encouraging and supportive. And he was a real advocate for the students. And finally, here is another institutional agent. Her name is AMELIA FENITINI, and she is also a very well-known sociologist. And Adrián was in her class. It was an honors sociology class, and she saw in him the potential. And he shared with her that he was interested in studying transfer in community colleges. At this time, he was working with her. She studies community gardens, and she had incorporated ADRIÁN into her research team. So that's why integrative agent, integrating him into an academic network. So she's a friend of mine. So she called me and said, I have this student. Do you think you would meet with him? And I said yes, because she's my friend. Otherwise, I don't know if I would have said yes, because, time is short. And what happened is that ADRIÁN, being part of a special program, had a small fund in which he could invite a faculty member to dinner. So he invited me to dinner at the University Club at USC. And that dinner turned into almost a 3-hour conversation. By the end of the evening, I offered ADRIÁN a position at the Center for Urban Education. And I had never had an undergraduate research assistant before, but we brought him in and we assigned him to work on a project that we happened to have with LA Trade Tech, where he had initially started his work. Now, the point here is that I had, and so did Amelia, and so did Jorge and Manuel, we all had resources. And we had resources in terms of knowledge. I happen to have resources in terms of money to be able to hire research assistants. And we used all of our resources to work with ADRIÁN and to provide a path for him to pursue what he aspired to. When he joined the center, he became part of a community of other primarily Latino and African American PhD students, which exposed him to the possibility of going on for his PhD. And indeed, here is ADRIÁN. He will be earning his PhD in the next couple of months. And in speaking with him about the story around institutional agents that created this path to success for him, this is what he said. If I did not have these agents, I am not sure my tenure at USC would have been successful. The college is very white, and navigating that for someone of my background is not easy. It is not only that they bridge important resources, but also that they create a sense of belonging for the entire institution. Now, if you were looking at this carefully, you may have realized something about all of the institutional agents. All of them are Latino and share something in common with ADRIÁN. My point here is that often to be a transfer or an institutional agent, it is important to be able to connect with students in terms of their own personal life and to go, and what ADRIÁN said to me is to go over and above. Now, his story is one story. There may be many, many more stories of ADRIÁN's and ADRIÁNA's, but it makes a very powerful statement for why we need to change our hiring practices particularly around faculty. I don't think it's coincidental that all of the institutional agents in ADRIÁN's life were Latinx. And in part it is because it's not enough for someone to care, to be caring, if you cannot walk in ADRIÁN's shoes. And those institutional agents were able to do that. So, so when we think about transfer agents or institutional agents, it's much more than caring. Essentially, it's supporting students and providing them with the resources and the networks that empower them. Sometimes we may, without realizing, delivering support in ways that actually come off as disempowering. I was giving a presentation yesterday at an institution, and one of the faculty participants mentioned how compassionate he was, and that it broke his heart to see these poor downtrodden students not be able to be successful. And that is totally the wrong thing. It's not compassion that Adrián needed. He needed the resources that I could decide to give to him, and that the same thing happened with all of the other individuals. So, in terms of, let me see if I can move this to the side so I can see. Okay. So what can institutional agents, faculty members do? And I'm talking about faculty here and less so about student affairs staff, because we often talk about transfer only from a student affairs perspective, and faculty do need to be involved. And here are some of the ways in which faculty can do that. They can share their own story, which is one of the things that MANUEL, Adrián's English instructor, did, and that was very important to the students. You can integrate transfer information into your syllabus. Very few faculty members, if you review syllabi from community colleges, will you find information about transfer. You should not just tell students, go to the transfer fair. You have to prepare them on how to go to the transfer fair and what to do there and how to speak to those recruiters. Going to a transfer fair is a cultural practice. And I won't go on through each of this, but what I'm saying is that there are many things that we can do as instructors, whether at the community college as well as at the four-year college. In showing you the story of Adrián, I wanted to show that it took people, institutional agents from both institutions, to support him. So why is, Janet, can you tell me how much longer I have?
You've got a good 10 minutes. How about that?
All right. So one of the things is that the dilemma here is the individuals that I feature as transfer agents were not taught how to be transfer agents or institutional agents. Something, there was something that in their experience, in my particular experience, was, besides being a Latina, was that I had worked in community organizing before I became a professor. So I was sensitive to issues of, particularly in the Latinx community. And for the other faculty members, it was their own experiences as students, particularly in highly selective institutions. So, but Latinos are, underrepresented in the faculty bodies of both community colleges and four-year colleges and universities. So we need to develop this institutional agency competency among the dominant group, which tends to be, white faculty members. In addition to hiring more Latinx, African-American, and Indigenous faculty. So transfer is important because Latinos tend to overwhelmingly enroll in community colleges and have very high transfer aspirations. So what I'm showing you here is data from East Los Angeles Community College, where we have done work. And you can see there the differences in transfer rates across white, Latinx, and Black students. So what is the solution to this problem? Well, there are two ways of thinking about how to develop institutional agents or transfer agents and also address the problem of low transfer numbers. We believe in the work that we have done that individuals become, or institutional agents when they can be engaged in a process of actually studying their practices from a racial equity lens, that can be a powerful catalyst for them to become institutional agents. And we have written about that. We have an article in the Harvard Education Review of another inquiry project that we did at Long Beach City College, and how that impacted some of the faculty. So what I'm going to show you here now is work that we did at East Los Angeles College. And I mentioned that Alfred Herrera is in the audience, and Alfred is very integral to this project because we invited him to speak to it, and also because he has been a champion for transfer from East Los Angeles Community College, which is it's a Hispanic serving institution. It is predominantly Latino. And he has been the connector between ELAC and UCLA. So what we did at East Los Angeles Community College, they had those low transfer rates, and we created with them an inquiry group that decided to look into why those low transfer rates. And this is just the first page of a report that we did that lists the work. And I'm going to just show you a little bit of that. So one of the things that happens in higher education is that when we see low transfer rates, we might say, well, we need better articulation agreements. We need a better transfer center, a whole variety of programs, but often without really looking into why the problem exists. So the work that we do is, what John Dewey, the philosopher, said: when you encounter an indeterminate situation, you have to inquire into it. So let's say that those low transfer rates for Latinx students represents an indeterminate situation. There may be many, many reasons for it. So these are some of the questions, the inquiry questions, that the team at East Los Angeles Community College started to work with. In what ways do we do transfer here? How does transfer really work? Who does it work for? How are we communicating the transfer process to students, and so forth? So what we created with them is all of the parts of an institution that impact transfer, policies, data practices, special programs, and so forth. So this is actually something that we created for them. And as part of the inquiry process, the ESTELA listed all of the things that, that seemed to, that were involved with transfer, including the transfer center, faculty involvement, articulation policies, and so forth. And the next thing that we did with them was, as part of the inquiry, was to look at documents that are important documents at ELAC, to see how transfer was portrayed in these documents, as well as how was equity portrayed in these plans, in these documents. And we have a document analysis tool that was used for this, and which you can find in the Q Equity tools. It's available, it's open, you can use it. So the document analysis, the purpose was already what I already said, is to understand how ELAC addresses equity, how they address transfer equity, and so on. So what did we find by doing, well, not we, the team. So the team was made up of faculty as well as staff. And what they found when they did this document analysis, one of the things that they analyzed was the guide that they would provide to students on what the things that they have to do to transfer. Well, one was that guide was not very welcoming. The font was too small, there was no introduction, it was, contractual language. The document did not necessarily attempt to create a partnership between with students. Instead of demystifying the transfer process, it made it even more complex by the use of acronyms, symbols that would just be very, very difficult to understand. We also found that there was no acknowledgement that ELAC was a Hispanic serving institution. So the point is that the document itself was not a document that would help students prepare for transfer. In fact, it made it even more complicated. So the results of that were, here you can see it on the right-hand side, that they changed the document to be able to be more responsive to students and to use language that is much more accessible. And it's also more validating of students being able to transfer. So what I'm saying here is that oftentimes we create transfer interventions without first looking at what might be causing transfer problems based on the ways in which we are already doing things. So this is one example. And the other part was that the group did an observation of the orientation for first-time students, because we wanted to see, okay, how are students introduced to transfer opportunities at orientation? And what we found are all of the things that you can see here. The orientation was not consistent in terms of content. They were dry, they were unclear, often uninspiring. There were PowerPoint issues, and essentially transfer was invisible in the orientation session. So there was which means that students were not being socialized into developing a transfer identity from the very beginning. We also calculated together how many more students they would have to transfer by race and ethnicity into the UC and the Cal State system in order to reach goals that have been set by the state in the state strategic plan for community colleges, Vision for Success. And so here you can see that in order to reach those goals for Latinx students, they need to transfer over 1,000 Latinx more students than currently, which is an enormous task that requires a lot of planning. So let me look at my time, which I have a feeling may be up. And,
well, you are in a good spot if you have a few more nuggets, and then I know we have had a few questions come through that I want to pose to you as well.
That's fine. I will stop there. And what I want to say then in conclusion is that transfer is a major racial equity issue, and we need to understand it in that way. That many of the practices in our campuses that are about transfer can be racialized. So for instance, I mentioned the example of the honors programs. Here in California, there are honors programs that guarantee transfer to some of the UCs. And often those, if you don't look at who is in those, who gets access to those privileged programs, you will find that even though you may have a majority Latinx student in that community college, they are way underrepresented in those guaranteed transfer programs. Same thing for Black students. So it's important to ask, how does this honors program, how does this transfer center work specifically for Latinx, Black, Indigenous students, or other racially minoritized students within your context? Don't assume that because you have a transfer center, students are getting the information that they need. And one last thing I will say is when we did a similar project at Long Beach City College. One of the faculty members who was assigned to observe what went on in the transfer center, she put her hand over the materials that were in the transfer center and collected the dust in the materials. So I highly recommend that for those of you who want to address transfer, whether at a 4-year campus or a 2-year campus, to actually engage in an inquiry process that asks, how does this really work? And who does it work for by race and ethnicity? So I'll stop there and I'll answer questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bensimon. I think your words are going to ring really true with our audience, because so many individuals here are practitioners who are trying to bring forward new transfer initiatives, trying to convince their administrations that we need to focus on transfer in it. And if you could talk for just a minute about how we can persuade our administrators who are now also becoming more aware of equity issues, that both transfer and transfer as an equity imperative are important. What are some of the ways that we can help them understand the importance of both of these issues?
Yeah, I think that, well, first of all, it depends on the states, right? So here in California, we happen to have a very progressive chancellor for community colleges who is not afraid to speak about systemic racism, who has told the colleges that they have to address it. And we also have our strategic plan, which Vision for Success, which says that the goal is to increase transfer by 35% by race and ethnicity. So it's not 35% overall. So that's one way. You can have policies that that are progressive and that support racial equity. You can also you can recognize colleges and leaders who do the right thing. So here in California, the Campaign for College Opportunity recognizes community colleges that are doing very well in transfer, and also recognizes transfer champions. And Alfred Herrera is one of those transfer champions that was recognized by the Campaign for College Opportunity. And the other thing in terms of how can you convince leaders is, I don't think that we use data very well. And so I would say that institutional researchers and others can help leaders understand how well or how poorly they're doing with transfer by showing data, again, by race and ethnicity, but also tapping into the resources of the National Clearinghouse. I think this should be done routinely. Every year, you should monitor of the students who transfer to, to Cal State Los Angeles. Are they still there? Did they get their baccalaureate? And the National Clearinghouse has all that information, but colleges don't always use it. We used it with Long Beach City College. And one of the things that we learned when we did was that even though a large group of Latinx students qualified for admission into the UC system, only applied still to the Cal State system. And I'm not suggesting that, that we should not give importance to the Cal State system. Absolutely, it's extremely important. But we all know that also that if students go to the UC system, other kinds of opportunities will open up for them, like they did for ADRIÁN by coming to USC, which was so, unique in many ways.
I loved your story of ADRIÁN, by the way, and illustrating that his path was peppered with people that looked like him, and how very important that was for him in connecting with those agents. For our transfer agents across the country who perhaps don't look like the students that they are serving, how can they continue to be responsible transfer agents and to help students build their own agency?
Yeah, so at Long Beach City College there, what we did, we had a team of faculty members, and we paired them up with students who had already transferred from Long Beach City College. And we trained those faculty on how to conduct ethnographic interviews with the students to find out what their experience had been like at Long Beach City College in terms, and then transferring. And what those faculty members, learned essentially was that the students relied a lot more on their own peers, that they did not, that they, that faculty were not always reaching out to them. And that was a big eye opener to hear it from the students and to begin to hear what they could do. But I would say that being a transfer agent, it's not just about being a good person. It is a competency, and it's a competency that needs to be taught. And it needs to be a form of professional development. I believe that all community college faculty should be invested and should know how to support transfer aspirations of students, and also how to incorporate transfer into their syllabi. And I don't think that we do that systematically. We need to see each student as a potential transfer. And why do I say that? Because even though there are many well-paying positions that you can earn with an associate degree or a certificate, the fact is that we know that there are major salary differences depending on whether you only have a high school degree, an associate degree, or a baccalaureate. And for communities like the Latino community that rely so much on community colleges, this is and if, I always say here in California, if we don't get more Latinos earning baccalaureates and higher degrees, the older population like me, we're going to suffer. Our Social Security is going to suffer, and our housing value. So it's, if you cannot convince people because it's the moral right thing to do, it is self-interest.
We will persuade them in whatever means necessary, for sure. So I wanted you to know that we did share your document, your article with the audience, and we have also connected them to the Center for Urban Education. And the tools that you have created and the language that you have wrapped around institutional agents, transfer agents, equity imperative is incredibly important. So once our audience has gone through and has read and has explored your tools, and as they're doing that, what is that one last piece of information or advice would you give to them as a human being? Because you just said it's just not enough to be a good person. What's that one thing that, whether you're a practitioner, an administrator, a faculty member, a researcher, a community-based organizer, what can you do to be the best transfer agent that you can possibly be?
I think that you need to perhaps reflect on what have you done so far around supporting students to transfer. And then I think that it would be, what more could you do, but also who have you done it for? And that being a transfer agent is not waiting for students to come to you, but it's for you to figure out how to go to students, whether you're a faculty member or a counselor, and in particularly to not expect students to know what questions to ask or what information. So I think that a transfer agent is somebody who scaffolds the transfer process and the transfer practices for students. We assume just too much, and go and do what I just showed you. Go organize your colleagues, organize a team of 5 to 10 people, and use our document review tool and review your transfer documents. Take our observation tool and go and sit in the transfer center at different hours of the day and using our observation tool, write down what you observe, and you might find that the transfer center is not a welcoming place, or that students use the transfer center because it has a copying machine. As we found that at Long Beach City College. So what I'm telling you, you have those tools. You could create a project on your own campuses to do what I described. And I know that I described it quickly, but many of the things that I've said are on the website.
Excellent advice. I love the action orientation to it. That's any of us could pick up and do any of those things. And again, it's being mindful, being reflective, and really being intentional about our practices and evaluating those practices. So thank you for that advice. Thank you for your perspectives today and bringing those to our audience. You are truly a transfer champion, and we are grateful to have you with us today. So if I could get the audience to use your emojis and your claps and your thank yous, if you will do that and share some support for Dr. Bensimon, I would appreciate it. Thank you for your time today, most definitely. And Dr. Bensimon, if we could keep you for just a second, we've got a little bit of a surprise for you, if you will. I find it a little ironic that you mentioned earlier about the Transfer Champion Awards. You may or may not know that we also have our top tier award, our Benita C. Jacobs Transfer Champion. We have Champion, we have Catalyst, and we have Rising Stars. And every year we select an individual to receive our top honor, and we are pleased to bestow that honor upon you this year, our Benita C. Jacobs Transfer Champion. And we have a few folks that want to share words with you. So Sean, if you will hit cue, let's do it.
Today, it is indeed a pleasure to have the opportunity to say congratulations to a legend, an icon, an exemplar, a trailblazer, a pathfinder, someone with conviction, someone with grit, someone with grace, someone with the cadence, but also the humanity that lifts others as she climbs. I am describing, in a word, ESTELA.
ESTELA has been conceptualizing and creating tools to measure equity for over a quarter of a century. Now the word equity is suddenly in vogue, and ESTELA, as we know, has been an equity trendsetter and trailblazer for quite a while.
ESTELA, through highly influential participatory action research projects, you have been a true transfer agent and embodied the commitments of a transfer champion.
You have not only changed my life professionally and personally as a former transfer student, but also in supporting thousands of practitioners and institutional leaders into reforming their policies and practices to support racially minoritized transfer students.
I should also add how important you've been as a mentor and teacher of many others who have joined the effort to increase the success of transfer students. Their work is making a difference today and will carry your legacy forward.
You know, as I've come into this space and place within this work, who you have been, what you have done has been core, has been foundational, and has underpinned so much of what I do, so much of what many of us do.
It was June of 2013 when the Center for Urban Education came to my college. I walked into that meeting an award-winning faculty member who got along with all of his colleagues. But I walked out knowing that I needed to change and to somehow, some way, be a leader of change.
This is such an acknowledgement of all of the work that you've done to support racially minoritized students in higher education. I also want to say thank you for all of the support, the guidance, and the mentorship that you've offered me for close to 10 years now.
I want to convey my own gratitude to you for the mentorship you provided me as a graduate student and continue to do now as a faculty member. I've learned so much from you about research, about teaching, and especially about racial equity in higher education.
I can think of no one who has so effectively braided these strands and through each targeting equity, opportunity, and freedom. Your biggest thank you will come from the many African American and Latinx students for whom you've worked and who now hold college degrees or are on their way to them.
Stella retired? That's the word on the street, but I don't think so. She will continue to work incessantly to bring equity-mindedness to the whole higher education system.
Congratulations, Estela, and thank you for your transformative work for equity in higher education. I'm really proud to have been a part of it.
Thank you for everything you do to support transfer students.
Thank you and congratulations on this hard-earned and well-deserved award.
We are all looking forward to seeing the ways in which you move forward, carrying with you this richly deserved honor.
Congratulations!
Congratulations! Wow, I can't believe you know, I didn't know about this.
I know you didn't know about this. How fun is that?
And ADRIÁN didn't even say a word.
Well, not only are we talking about not so secret transfer agents this week, we are also keeping secrets from you, but we want to say deep from our hearts that we are grateful to you, your impact on transfer students, obviously on the profession and the professionals within the profession. So on behalf of the entire NISTS community, congratulations to you on this honor.
Thank you so much. And I hope I can have that tape.
Yes, we will absolutely ensure that you get that video.
I don't know how you identified all those people.
We had a few, a little help in the background. So most definitely want to say thank you. And if you have anything, a quick mention that you want to say, we'll give you the floor.
No, I'm so grateful. That was a beautiful surprise. I probably am close to tears. Those are all my very good friends, colleagues, former students, and yes, I thank you for being so thoughtful about it. And I know that there were many questions that I didn't answer, and I would encourage those individuals, if they want to send me the questions by email, they can do that, and I will respond. And you can find me very easily. Just, yeah. So that's what I would, yeah. Thank you so much.
You're most welcome. Thank you.
Okay. And I wish you well with the rest of the conference.
Thank you. What a great way to kick off the rest of our conference and moving into the rest of the presentation for our transfer champions. We will now take a moment to recognize our transfer folks who fall in the category of Catalyst, as well as Rising Stars, our Dissertation of the Year award winner, as well as our transfer student ambassadors. So we have one more video for all of you. As you're looking at the video, check out the names of these individuals, find them on your conference app, make a connection with them. They have words of wisdom they'll be sharing with you, many of them at a session later on, tomorrow morning, as a matter of fact. But please take a look at this year's Transfer Champions Dissertation of the Year Award and our transfer student ambassadors. Take it away, Sean.
I love working with transfer students because they are complete and total rock stars, and I heart them.
Transfer success is a team sport. It takes all of us to make it happen.
I advocate for transfer students by using my research and teaching to highlight them as assets and to promote equitable transfer pathways.
students at the A. James Clark School of Engineering by developing programming that focuses on a sense of belonging and community among students.
I love working with transfer students because students who choose to begin at a community college shouldn't face additional barriers on the way to their bachelor's degree.
I love working with transfer students because they are the heart of our university, and they were the inspiration for why my brilliant colleagues and I were able to open a transfer and returning student resource center on our campus.
I advocate for transfer students by honoring their experiences and through my research on the academic and social processes that support transfer student success.
I advocate for transfer students through my research on transfer receptivity of four-year institutions.
Thank you, NISTS. My advice to transfer professionals is to not see transfer students by the category in which they fall into or statistic, but by which the experiences and stories they individually represent. Thank you once again.
Hello, my advice to transfer students is to join clubs and organizations to become more acclimated to your new campus environment.
Hello, my name is Gutierrez, and my message to transfer students is to never give up on your dreams, because no matter how hard things get, you can do it.
My advice for transfer professionals is to improve awareness of imposter syndrome.
Thank you, and congratulations to all of our award winners. You are a rock star bunch, and we're so happy to show people what you know, what you do, and to celebrate you today. Congratulations. As we wrap up this opening session, I want to remind all of you that we have a scavenger hunt going on as part of our virtual activities. And today's code for this opening session was just placed in the chat. For those of you who are interested, it is #welcome to NISTS 2021. You'll see different codes throughout the conference. You'll want to use that oftentimes for attending all of the different sessions. Check out the conference app to get you up to date on how to play the scavenger hunt. We have amazing prizes, as Maria will tell you in the video. Again, Dr. Bensimon, thank you so much for being an important part of our session today and for kicking off the conference in a very reflective and empowering and passionate way. All of you, get ready for your next session. I want to give you 2 heads up. We have a great relaxation yoga chair session courtesy of our friends at College Source a little bit later. And then we also tomorrow, our friends at NACAC are bringing us a virtual dog park that you will not want to miss. So enjoy the rest of the conference. Know that we'll be communicating with you virtually, and we will be here for you behind the scenes. Thank you all, and have a great conference.